Greetings, Fright fans. Dr. Gangrene here. So this is a little bit of a viewer response episode because I had a viewer named Oscar666 who wrote to me on one of my recent Dr. Gangrene episodes and mentioned that he didn't know that Dr. Gangrene existed back in 1999, and could I give a history of the channel in a video, make a video about the history of the channel. So I'm happy to do that, Oscar. That's what this video is about. This will be all about Dr. Gangrene and Chiller Cinema and my history. So I've been meaning to get to this video for a while anyway. Thank you for the prompt there, Oscar. So to get to the history of Dr. Gangrene, you got to go back a little bit before, into the early 90s, when myself and a guy named Chuck Angel were self-publishing comic books. The first company was called Out of the Cellar Comics, and the first book we put out was, of course, a horror comic book, and it was a horror anthology comic book. So this sort of shows you my obsession with horror anthology stories back even in those days. And I believe 1994 was when we put out our first one, and it was called Monkey Stew. It was a horror anthology book. I drew the wraparounds, Chuck inked the wraparound stories. I also drew one or two of the stories in there. Chuck drew a couple of them. We sort of split it up. We put a second book out after that called Best Sellers. That book is now going for huge money on eBay because one of the artists, this was another anthology comic book, and one of the artists was a guy named Eric Powell. This was Eric's first printed piece of art, first thing he ever had printed. It was called Monster Boy. The story was called Monster Boy. And it was a prototype of a comic that he would come out with later that would become very famous, called The Goon. And after that, we changed the name of the company to Volunteer Comics because we thought that maybe it would sort of help with the sales of the comics. It really didn't. We put out mostly superhero comics with them until the last two comics we did, which were, once again, horror comics. And this was a female Frankenstein story called Tombstone Blues, or Dead Girls Need Love Too. And we did 2 issues of that. And then by that time, this was the mid to late 90s, we were both getting really burned out. I had gotten married, have a family. Chuck did the same thing. We both had little kids, and we just were worn out with it. We had to take a break. So we took a break for a while. My youngest son was born a couple of years later. I decided, you know what, I think I'm ready to start getting back into doing some kind of creative venture. I met a guy here in Hendersonville, Tennessee, where I had moved, was living in Nashville, born and raised Nashvilleian. Moved up here to Hendersonville and met a guy who was doing a cable access TV show. And I thought that was interesting. I had actually toyed with the idea of doing a cable access show about 10 years prior to this, but never went through with it. So I started asking him a lot of questions about how it worked and how he found time to do it. Just a lot of nuts and bolts questions. And he encouraged me, said, I think you should do your own show. I think you'd be good at it. I decided, I think he's right. And really the only type show that interested me from the get-go was a horror host show. That's what I wanted to do. The type show that used to be on TV back in the 70s and 80s in Nashville and just wasn't being done anymore. Nobody was doing it, so I thought, you know what? I want to do it myself. Sir Cecil Creep was the first horror host that I remembered from Nashville. There was one prior. Dr. Lucifer was the first. A guy named Ken Bramming was Dr. Lucifer, and he was the first host in the 50s. And he went up into the 60s, and then the show ended. In the 1970s, Sir Cecil Creep was the host in Nashville for 3 years, 70 to 73, and then he came back in the 1980s on the Nashville network. Now, I didn't really get to watch Sir Cecil Creep in his initial run in the 70s. My parents wouldn't really let me stay up and watch it, unfortunately. But I did get to meet him because we had a Boy Scout event that Sir Cecil Creep appeared at, and everybody that was there got a patch that says Sir Cecil's Ghoul Patrol. And the first thing I did when I started this horror host show was I got that patch because my mom had saved all of them and sewed them all on the back of a blue jean jacket that I used to wear around. Has all my patches on the back. Pulled that patch off and sewed it on the pocket of my lab coat. as tribute to Sir Cecil Creep. 1999 is when Chiller Cinema debuted on the first episode was July 1st, 1999. Cobwebs, I'll have to get it for that. Oh, well, hello there. I didn't realize anyone else was in the lab. Well, just don't stand there, man. Come on in, come on in. Come in and welcome. Welcome to Chiller Cinema. Oh, I am your host, Dr. Gangrene. Welcome to my lab. I have a shed at my house that we turned into a studio. Gutted the place, pulled everything out of it. It's a little tool shed, a little work shed. There's actually a video on here where I take you on a tour of the shed and show you what it looked like. The show started catching on. It got more and more popular. We moved the show from cable access onto regular TV, onto one of the networks. First it was the WB, but then we later switched to the CW and ran it there for a number of years, 5 or 6 years on the CW. And by this time, when I started Chiller Cinema, we were running half-hour programs. But when we moved to the CW, we started hosting actual movies. And they gave us a package of films, and we showed all kinds of stuff. We showed some stuff that was fantastic, like Total Recall and Dreamscape. And then we showed some stuff that was really bottom of the barrel stuff, like Space Mutiny and Aerobicide. And actually, I kind of like hosting that stuff better because it's so much fun, because they're so bad but they're fun. And so anyway, we had a great time doing it. Chuck left the show at some point along the end of the Chiller Cinema run. I started shooting with a guy named Cameron McCaslin, and he's been my director and partner with the show ever since then. The show has won awards. It's been featured in USA Today and the Dick Tracy comic strip. That's what this is here. This is a piece of original art from the Dick Tracy comic strip where Dr. Gangrene appeared as Dr. Mean Green. We changed the name from Dr. Gangrene to Dr. Mean Green just because we didn't want to have any kind of copyright issues pop up maybe at some point in the future where, the comic strip might try to say we own that name now or we own your character or anything stupid like that. But yeah, I've been fortunate. I've had some amazing things like this happen. I've been on Spike TV with the character, and it just continues to go. So anyway, this is sort of a brief history of Chiller Cinema and how we got started. There's a lot more to it, but that's sort of the overview of how we got started and where we are now. Well, now I'm doing this show here on YouTube because I enjoy doing it. I want to share all this whole archive of stuff. I've got a whole shelf full of Chiller Cinema episodes that have never been seen outside their original run. Then we've got all the creature feature stuff, the Dr. Gangrene Presents stuff, and then I've also got a short-lived series that I did for a year called The Mad Movie of the Week. So there's plenty of old content, and I want to keep shooting new content. I like doing this kind of stuff where I can come on and just sort of talk to you guys and answer viewer questions. And then I want to shoot new host stuff here soon too. So I'm going to also have something new for October, for Halloween this year, for 2017. So stay tuned. I'll be announcing that soon. In the meantime, if you guys haven't subscribed, please do that. And if you have any other questions like Oscar666 did, feel free to shoot them my way. Anyway, this is Dr. Gangrene, long-winded, saying thanks for watching. Stay mad.